I want to talk about this.
Not this building per se, but what was here before. Before our cherished Tetris-influenced water filtration plant was built here in 1958. Now, 64 years might seem like a long time for most of Point Claire and the West Island, but we're in the village now. Woot, woot. 30 years before Point Claire was established as a village, when it was just a group of homes and a church, in 1824, Dr. Mount bought a 4-acre plot of land and on that built an 18-room stone house. The man was obviously rich, and this was probably just his summer residence by the lake. If you look at a map at the area of the time, there's no doubt that this was probably the most majestic plot of land in the entire village. But in 1852, Dr. Mount sold the property to the St. Joachim Church because they had all the money at the time, and turned it into a boys' school. Then between 1862 and the 1870s at some point, the house became a private residence once again. It was bought by a very prominent figure in Point Claire's history. His name was William McKinnon, and he became Point Claire's very first mayor in 1854. Though Mayor McKinnon passed away not too long after the purchase of this home, referred to by the family as Willow Bank, it became the McKinnon's hotspot for hosting family events and recreation with friends. In an article from October 18, 1886, George McKinnon, son of William McKinnon, brought fellow members of the Montreal Hunt Club to Willow Bank so that they could enjoy, as they said, the best hunting country on the island. After arriving at Point Claire train station, they went straight to the Willow Bank, where Urilla, George's younger sister, had prepared a nice breakfast for them before they went out on a nice little hunting spree, and then a nice lunch before returning back to the city that same day. And that was worthy of an article in the Gazette. By 1887, the McKinnon family decided to put the Willow Bank up for sale, with all its splendid beauty on display in fine print. Built of cut stone, multi-seasonal, fine dry cellars, and all the conveniences of a city dwelling. Stable and coach house and ice house, room for a possible tennis court, a wharf, boat and bakehouse, and 30 minutes to the city by train, and just over an hour by car, probably horse and buggy I'd imagine. And most importantly, a fine avenue of willows from high road to house.
And there's a willow tree still here. That must be why they called it the Willow Bank.
They thought new buyers would flock to this property, but alas, nothing. With the house still under the ownership of the McKinnon family, in 1890, at the age of 31, Urilla passed away, followed by George passing away at the Willow Bank in 1894 at the age of 38, turning the Willow Bank into Orphan Annie. In 1901, new agents were brought in, and they put sale ads in the Gazette ad nauseum, nearly every week. They even tried renting it. Finally, in 1918, it was sold to a young entrepreneur, Miss Mary Priest. She took over Willow Bank and turned it into an official inn. This was great news because now the public could enjoy the splendor that only private family and friends could enjoy for so many years. And young Catholic boys. Joining the likes of other high-end hotels on the lakeshore, such as the Maples Inn and the Chateau St. Louis in Valois. And Miss Priest saw the opportunity and finally put in those tennis courts. Not one, 3, advertising itself in the summer resort section of the Gazette for particular people to come for high tea and dancing. The only downer in this story is that Miss Priest bought the land at the end of what I call the golden age of Point Claire, which ends as a result of the stock market crash in 1929. The last advertisement for the Willow Bank Inn was published in the Gazette June 6, 1928. The building was deemed unsafe and torn down in 1930.
The building was gone, but the grounds remained. So what was to become with this 4-acre plot of land?
This piece of land was once home to Point Claire's elite, famous, and religious. Built by Dr. Mount in 1824, sold to the Catholic Church, sold again to William McKinnon, and then again to Miss Mary Priest. The Willow Bank was a gorgeous building that stood on these very grounds, surrounded by willow trees. Eventually, the home/inn/school was torn down in 1930, leaving the majestic land as a blank canvas for its next chapter. In 1936, 6 years after the demolition of the now infamous Willow Bank Mansion, the city decided that it was time to open the grounds to the public and it was to be done with style, referring to the opening of the new park to be a gala event. And why not? After 250 years of history in the village, the citizens deserved a nice beautiful green space that they could call their own. La Roque Park opened up on the evening of August 20th, 1936. It was a three-day tombola, and thousands were expected, with the official slogan being, "Come and enjoy yourself." Some good marketing right there. The grounds were all dressed up and ready to give the proper homage to its former glory, Willow Bank glory. The land was transformed into a fairyland park with lights, booths, and attractions. There was a bandstand at the center of the grounds equipped with speakers, and all the old trees from times past, like the willows, had been preserved. At the foot of La Roque Park on Lakeshore Road was a majestic bower-shaped entrance gate. The following year would see another tombola, as well as years going into the early 1940s. However, in 1943, the town of Pointe Claire decided to change the name of the park to Memorial Park. Not much had changed. The grounds were still lovely and cherished by all, pulling in residents from all along the lakeshore to their big carnivals. That's carnivals with a K. Actually, the only difference was that they took down the big entrance. Yeah, I don't know. If you look at the 47 picture, it's not there. In 1944, the Kinsmen hosted their first annual carnival that lasted years, bringing these majestic grounds' legacy into the 1950s. But before I continue, I've got some questions. Like, where did they get the name La Roque from? And why didn't anyone make a big fuss out of changing the name after 10 years? Let me take you back 1 year before the opening of La Roque Park. It was 1935, and Pointe Claire was about to embark on one of its most intense elections in its history. You see, for years before 1935, the mayor of Pointe Claire was won by acclamation, meaning no opponents. So no vote. And 1935 at first proved no different, with the Pointe Claire Citizens Association showing their support for J. Valerie Legault. He was their guy. He was also a local merchant and from a family that had a long-standing history in the town of Pointe Claire. So to spread the word, they sent a letter to the Valois Citizens Association, informing them of their choice for new mayor. The Valois Citizens Association respectfully declined, because they too had a guy. His name was William La Roque. He had been an alderman for the last 9 years. So this means that an election was coming up. It was a big deal. Even the Gazette was covering this. The results had La Roque winning with a 61% majority. And the Pointe Claire Citizens Association guy lost. Pointe Claire being Pointe Claire Village. So that means that Mayor La Roque was mayor when La Roque Park was named La Roque Park in a part of town that mostly didn't vote for La Roque. So that's why maybe there wasn't a big protest to change the name from La Roque Park to Memorial Park. But these are just guesses. They're good guesses, but I'm open to suggestions. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that this plot of land was the bee's knees in Pointe Claire for over 130 years. So the question remains, why is it a water filtration plant? Around the time when Pointe Claire became a town in 1911, new water mains were laid down in the lake to take the lake water out of the lake and through the town. Shortly after, in 1917, the first water filtration plant in the village was built. Because Pointe Claire was the size that it was at the time, and also because of the technology available at the time, running water was reserved for the higher end facilities. Only a few homes had that luxury, like the Willow Bank, for example. Other than that, you had to buy water by the barrel, which was delivered by horse and buggy. Now, with the organic growth of the town by 1940, with a population of 5,072, the town decided that it was time to expand that original water filtration plant. The original plant was located here, and it was in this facility that fluoride was introduced in 1954, because that's when we started to care about smiles. And then 1 year later, in 1955, Pointe Claire was recognized as having the best water filtration in Canada. So we were the Canadian kings of the water, hands down. But it gets even better. This was a time when Pointe Claire was thriving. It was growing, full of little baby boomies who spent their summers attending tombolas in Pointe Claire's beautiful parks, like Memorial Park, which coincidentally sat right next to said water filtration plant, right across Victoria. They were neighbors. They were really close, but some felt that it wasn't close enough. You see, our story is in the 1950s now, an era of unprecedented growth. So much so that you had a population growth of 8,500 to 10,000 in a span of 2 years. And apart from population growth, commerce was about to engulf the entire northern hemisphere of Pointe Claire. It is because of this that they established the Filtration and Municipal Buildings Committee in 1954 with the intention of starting over. They had to redesign the entire system. By 1955, talk had started for the building of a new plant. They didn't have a location for it yet, but they knew they needed a big one. Land big enough that could hold a plant that could produce over 1 million gallons of water a day, with room to grow. The town consulting engineer suggested the plot of land just east of Victoria. Just east of Victoria. The land that we've been talking about for 3 weeks. The park, La Roque Park, Memorial Park, where the Willow Bank was. At least say the park's name. He calls it the land. So it was on April 27, 1955, when it was officially decided that the plant would be put on the grounds of the park. And when the residents found out about this, they were not happy. Articles were written in the local paper about the preservation of the park, and a substantial petition was circulated and was signed by 539 local residents. Now, council did show sympathy for this outcry of these petitions. I mean, they themselves were residents. They probably brought their sons and daughters to a tombola or two. Since most of the water filtration plant was going to be underground, the council ensured that they would try their best to maintain the aesthetic appeal of the park as much as possible. Meaning that if they didn't have to touch a tree, they wouldn't touch the tree. So construction started on the new plant, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, the Carnival with a K had to be relocated to a new location. By August of 1958, the water filtration plant was in full operation, and as the city continued to grow, so did the water filtration plant. It continued expanding and expanding until it consumed the entire plot of land. So today, it's not obvious at all that there was ever a park there to begin with. No one would have known that this plot of land held the highest esteem for nearly 130 years for villagers, tourists, and students alike, which is why I've classified the story of this piece of land as endangered. So the good news, though, is that we all love and enjoy our clean water that we have today. One of the best, most underrated luxuries that we have living in this part of the world. But the problem remained that Pointe Claire was still minus one park. The landscapes and shorelines we know are not always what we think they are. No one walks along the shore and thinks that what they're walking on is not a part of the natural landscape.
For example, if I was to walk here and turn the clock to time back 70 years, I'd be swimming. So to stay dry, I'd have to go here, right next to the yacht club. But you think this is a safe space? Well, if you go back another 100 years, tout wet encore. Mais comment ça se fait?
In the 1850s, when our dear Beaconsfield Golf Club was just a quarry because of its high-grade limestone, the large stone blocks quarried out were used to build the foundations of the Victoria Bridge. So to get it there, the quickest way was to build a spur line from the quarry all the way to the shore, and from that build a pier extending 800 feet into Lac St. Louis, where a barge would come and collect all the stone. Once the bridge was complete in 1859, the spur line was removed, the quarry became a golf course, as one does, and the pier became the most ideal location to build the eventual Pointe Claire Yacht Club some 20 years later, where McKinnon went and Roddick. Remember those guys? It's all tied in together. So this is what you would get if you were to look at Pointe Claire Village from above in 1879. You have a bay, which had all the characteristics of an actual bay: calm water, shallow in depth, and most believed that this would be the indefinite shoreline of Pointe Claire Village for generations to come. However, by the 1950s, land was becoming quite scarce within the village limits. It seemed with the scarce land around the village, The only place to put the plant was right here, right over the one and only park, Memorial Park, La Roque Park, where the Willow Bank was, the plot of land that goes back to the 1820s. Devastating news, I know, but they had no choice. Some other areas that were suggested to avoid building on the park was the quarry, but that was too big. They also suggested here, and even over here. But alas, all efforts failed, and by 1957, construction began in Memorial Park, rendering the town parkless. Parkless.
Parkless, yeah.
Rendering the town parkless. So what's a town with no park and no free land to do? You gotta build more land. In 1957, council agreed as a first step was to build a wall connecting the tip of the pier going across the bay to the school grounds. And then in 1958, discussions to have the new park space built began. It was decided that this useless piece of water was to become the next park of Point Claire Village. Filling of the bay began in December of 1958 and it ran all the way through to 1961. And keeping with traditional Point Claire Village fashion, they gave the park various names. Village Bay Park, Harborside Park was a good one, but not a keeper because in 1963, it officially opened as Alexandre Bourgeot Park. And he wasn't the mayor at the time, which was not a tradition. Why name the park after this man? Well, he was a doctor, he was a resident of Point Claire Village, and if you were under 25 living in the village at that time, chances are he delivered you. He was the beloved local doctor and resident of Point Claire Village who tragically died in 1960. It was actually very tragic. Message me if you want to know how he died. So looking back, the legacy of Lot 94 was sadly lost and forgotten because of the necessity of a new water filtration plant, which took its place at a time when expansion was inescapable and everyone was building towards the future. So much so that no one had time to think about preservation and honoring the past. However, call me Mr. Brightside, had those events not taken place, we would not have this beautiful park, which I consider the offspring of Lot 94. Though this park is very much here and present, the events that brought this park to us, this story, as I've stipulated in the last 4 parts, is an endangered story. A story that has now brought us into the 1960s. We're in the 60s, everyone, so well done. Finally, some memories that people will remember.